Ladies, gentlemen, and arisen of all ages, when it comes to the things that we love, the things we enjoy, we all have our own opinions. And a lot of the time, they tend to be pretty strong as well. After all, what's the point of being a fan of something if you can't violently and passionately force others to like it too? Or the opposite, if you don't like something, if you can make other people hate it as well. That said, there are all kinds of opinions, and while I think it is important that everyone is entitled to their own one, once you put it out onto the internet, it becomes fair game for me to point and laugh at if I choose to. So today we're going to have a look at some of the worst takes that I've seen in relation to Dragons Dogma 2, or just things that I find funny, with the disclaimer that I of course have no actual ill will towards these people, nothing against them at all. I think for the most part they are either just sort of misguided, misinformed, or just having a bad day and taking their anger out in some pretty weird ways and places. Starting off then, Captain Brent, if you wouldn't mind reading the first one for me.
Hey Capcom, you can purchase a good review DLC for $2.
Okay, let's open up with the big topic, and obviously this is a lot of the discourse around the game, but I have no interest in spending more time than necessary on it, so this is the only time I'm going to dwell on this really. I'd rather talk about more interesting and unique viewpoints, but the elephant in the room is of course the microtransactions, and I'm going to be very clear on my stance on this immediately. Microtransactions are always, in every situation, a negative for the player. Whether it's power boosting, whether it's just cosmetic, it doesn't matter. It changes the design philosophy for the game when some of the content is locked behind a paywall, even cosmetics. That said, microtransactions exist, and there is absolutely a sliding scale to how bad they actually are. And in my opinion, Dragons Dogma 2 is pretty much just at the lower end of it. That said, while everyone can yell their opinionated hardline stance off a nice high hill in the distance, I bet 90% of the people who complained about Dragons Dogma 2 having microtransactions and how that's just a plague upon the game and that no one should play it, have also played other games with microtransactions. If you don't want to play the game because you don't like the game, that's fine. I have no problem with that. If you don't like that the microtransactions exist, I agree with you, but unless you are going to take the stance that nobody should ever play a game that has microtransactions, including yourself, then it cannot be the be-all end-all of whether you think a game should exist, of whether you would even tell people that it's worth playing or not. All of that to say that we can all agree that microtransactions are a stain in gaming as a whole, but viewing their existence as the sole reason to not play a game without any context at all for how it actually functions is just a really bad faith move. Again, I get it, but I ask every person doing this to reflect on what other games they play personally, especially as, well, this person put this review up with 4 hours into the game and now has 80 hours in the game. Quite a bit of a difference there, huh? That said, they did eventually edit their review and add a fair bit more information and context. Brant?
After 30 hours, I can confidently state the following. Gameplay is good, though combat is a bit janky. Story is not really a strong point. This is personal preference. Performance is terrible in big cities. You are forced to something akin to Baldur's Gate 3 Honors Mode, just a single save file. There is no excuse for microtransactions in a full-priced single-player RPG. No, I don't care if they have done it forever. It's not okay in past games. It is not okay now. I don't care if you can get it easily in-game. I'm not going to change your mind. You're not going to change mine. This comment won't change anything in the long run, and Capcom will be fine. Have fun and be nice to each other.
Okay, I agree about the gameplay, I do love it personally, and I think janky, though, is definitely the wrong word. DD1 combat had jank. DD2 combat has a very specific flavor to it, in the same way that Monster Hunter does, sort of. Parts of combat can feel unintuitive at first, but that's because the game just functions differently than most games in the same genre. Once you get used to it, everything functions the same way in the game, and enemies have to deal with the same things that you do. Things like stumbling into walls, relying on pawns to help you when you get knocked over. Those are things that reduce the fluidity of combat, but also sort of increase the realism, the immersion, and they incentivize you caring more about your party. Not everyone wants a game that asks you to invest that much as a player, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being against this on just a conceptual point, but I do think that jank is a bad word for it. Performance, I will never fight back on as an issue, though. I haven't had many problems myself at all, but I know that the game does struggle for some people, and that simply needs to be fixed. No argument there. It is not in an acceptable state right now on multiple systems. There is no excuse for microtransactions in a full-price single-player RPG, is something that you said, and yeah, I agree with that, but I also think you've moved the goalpost quite a bit there. Why does it being full price or an RPG make microtransactions less okay than if it wasn't? If anything, as far as I'm concerned, in a single-player game, they're actually far less of an issue than in a multiplayer one, unless it affects the way they design the game as a whole. By this I mean specifically, well, not Dragons Dogma 2. The next line here, I don't care if you can get it easily in the game, that's fine if you don't care, but you can. A few hours into the game, nothing that is in microtransactions is unobtainable or even really difficult to get yourself. The game isn't hard enough or obtuse enough that you are incentivized to really buy any of these outside of personal impatience, as that is all they really give you, is some convenience, some speed. And I think it's incredibly valid to say that that is still bad, that they shouldn't do it. But to judge the entire game from their existence from something that some higher up suit on the money side of things decided, regardless of what the actual developers wanted, it just leaves a really sour taste in my mouth. All that said, I have to say the way that you ended this is what I do actually always want from people when they do make these kinds of comments that I bring up in these types of videos. This person is extremely self-aware that at the end of the day, these are opinions. Everyone will be fine. It doesn't really matter. So we should just have fun with what we can and be nice to each other. And hell yeah, I stand behind that part for sure at least.
In relation to a post about how the brine system is bad because dragons shouldn't be able to be swallowed up by shallow pools of water, I think you underestimate how difficult it is to include swimming.
Okay, I honestly can't tell if this is a joke or not, but in a non-spoilery way, water works the way that it does in this game for important and overarching lore reasons that you can find in your journey while playing. And so the idea that this whole important side of the lore for the universe and the game as a whole is entirely because the devs didn't want to create swimming animations is just absolutely hilarious to me.
I was prepared for some early on port optimization issues. The next issue, however, is unconscionable. I played the hell out of the original game on console, later did the same on PC, and then the iterations on top of that. I have really enjoyed the series and its quirky but refreshingly different playstyle. The save system has always been an odd choice, poorly designed but mostly functional. With Dragons Dogma 2, however, not only did they bring forward with them all of the bad about the old save system, they created an instant gameplay losing cliff that you can fall off of at just about any point.
Okay, alright, I'm with you a bit so far. What's the major problem you're referring to?
I spent hours in the game, many hours. I had saved the game manually many times along the way. I had camped many times along the way. I did not use the 2,000 gold inn due to it being expensive. The alternative is camping gear, which is heavy and somewhat expensive, but a good choice. Or so I thought. At least, I had that one beautiful save point that nothing could screw with, right? I had camped, the alternative to the inn. So worst case, that has my back too, right? Well, not right. I mistakenly chose after my first wipeout in the game to reload at my last inn rest. And it loaded me at my last inn rest. I then proceeded to force an autosave before realizing it and screwed myself.
Okay, sorry. Maybe I adjusted the exact wording at the end there to shorten down a particularly long review, but the long and short of this one is this is a negative review because the load last in rest button does exactly what it said. This person, after death, instead of choosing the quick and easy checkpoint load option that it default selects, instead purposefully chose to load their last in rest save. They say mistakenly, but clearly through the rest of the context of what they say, clearly what they mean is it was a mistake to do, but they didn't know until after the fact. They did it on purpose, because they for some reason assumed that it would include camp rests. And don't get me wrong, this is absolutely tragic. I feel bad for this person. Losing hours and hours and hours of gameplay progress because of something like this does suck. But this one's on you. You actively chose not to use the inns because they cost gold, even though they don't cost a crazy amount more than like a camping pack. And I will say 2,000 also isn't even much for infrequent occasions, even earlier on in the game. And then knowing that you didn't do that you purposely have avoided using inns for the majority of your gameplay, you then chose the option to load specifically the last time you were in an inn. And it says inn rest in the name of the option. Now it's also important to mention at this point, at least according to many other people here, this person was not screwed yet at this point, and if they had simply loaded in and realized what happened, they could have gone back to the menu without saving and just tried again and get in back where they were. Instead, they did something or other that forced an autosave, and by doing that, they bricked their save completely. So yes, this is a terrible situation to have happen, but is it truly the fault of the game? The creators deserving of a negative review and trying to discourage others from playing the game to begin with because you maybe made just a massive line of poor decisions back to back. The game tells you that resting at inns is important. The options that you literally choose here says in the name, not just rest in general, and then maybe you managed to autosave before realizing that you'd even done this in the first place. So I gotta say, this one might just be on you, buddy.
The combat is pretty fun, but becomes very easy and repetitive competitive about 10 hours into the game once you get a decent party together. In normal fights, you're literally unkillable because for some reason, you can use healing items even once your health reaches 0, which is rare to begin with.
Whoa, pro gamer in the house here! This game carries challenge for tons of people. If it doesn't for you, then you're above the average, so congratulations. While it may well be a valid complaint that it doesn't have the difficulty that you are looking for, but this was never advertised as being a super hard game. Difficulty wasn't the objective of it, so if you are actively trying to min-max every combat situation, you're gonna destroy the game. If you are taking things as you find them, experimenting with skills and vocations for fun, rather than just hard running the most busted things in the game once you find them, then it will be a lot harder. There's nothing wrong with playing games like that by any means, by actually min-maxing to hell. In fact, I support that. If you are doing that, I provide content that helps with that all the time, but it's worth recognizing that the game itself may not be easy so much as it is just the way that you are playing it being rewarded as a result. If you're playing it in more of a completionist fashion, in more of a min-max faction, then the game will be easier. And for the infinitely healing at 0 health thing, that is a part of that too, because you need a buttload of consumables for that to even be a thing you can do to begin with, because you will eat through them exceedingly fast. And on top of that, the whole death animation still plays if you do this, and you can still take damage and essentially re-die again at the cost of healing for no gain. So it's definitely not pure game in the slightest.
I just think that friction should be optional. Different players have different preferences, and I would say this for every game.
Yeah, I hate falling off of cliffs too because of declines and stuff. Friction sucks. Okay, for those who don't know, friction in this specific context isn't referring to like your shoes gripping on some rocks so you don't fall down. It is a gameplay term for purposefully created stress, anxiety, or inconvenience on the player from the developers in an attempt to add on to realism, immersion, or just general uniqueness and feel of the game. In Dragons Dogma 2, this is things like the awkwardness of fast travel, food decaying and rotting, weight systems in general, timed quest completions, or even something like Dragons Plague. It's a whole system of the game. So when this says friction should be optional, what they are asking for, what they're essentially doing, is the equivalent of saying that Souls games should have difficulty sliders. But instead of difficulty, they want to replace that with literally being able to turn on and off multiple different game mechanics, inherent parts of the game. What you are asking for is essentially the devs to create multiple different versions of the game that are all balanced to be their own enjoyable experience, even if you cut out major mechanics, and not in numerical ways like difficulty tends to be or an AI aggression type thing, but literally removing full-on aspects of the game but still having it feel good, which is just bewildering to me.
Love this game, but please fix sliding off of every surface that has the slightest incline.
Okay, now that is someone complaining about the actual friction, not gameplay friction.
Dragon's Plague is a horrible idea. I'm in Melv, I rest up because some of my pawns had reduced maximum HP, and I'm waiting for the ox cart. One of the pawns nukes the entire village because of Dragon's Plague, and I had no inkling at all that they had caught it. No voice lines, no comments of staying away from them, no glowing red eyes. My save is now just fucked because of this mechanics. I have 34 hours on this save, for God's sake. Why did they put this mechanic in?
Oh god, I love Dragon's Plague so much. For anyone who doesn't know, all important NPCs respawn after a week or two after dying of in-game time, so if this does happen to you, you can just rest a bunch in a row and things will fix themselves up. But the thing is, Dragon's Plague just conceptually is such a good mechanic. The true beauty of it is because NPCs respawn and because you can deal with it easily by just throwing pawns over bridges and stuff like that, it becomes almost like a mental game that you're playing against the devs in the background. It's like the game, which you've just lost because I reminded you that it exists, ever present in the background of your journey, never giving you any hints or advantages past the initial pop-up until bam, it just comes out because you weren't ready for it. It trusts you to remember to check on your pawns before resting every single time you go to an inn. Some people will rarely ever see this mechanic, might never see it at all in their playthrough. Some people have seen it multiple times in one go round through the story, and the whole thing is essentially just, well, friction. It exists to keep you on your toes. It wants to create anxiety in the player, and it wants to keep you grounded within the world, checking on your pawns, paying attention to how they behave to make sure they're all right. It's trying to make you actually put more thought into your group and actually, like you would if you were traveling with people, making sure that they're okay. And it just also makes you do silly shit like throwing people into rivers.
I have never played this game, just learned about Dragon's Plague today, and holy moly, it's one of the best things I have ever seen implemented in a game. Absolutely hilarious. This is such a cool feature, I am in love with it. LOL!
And that's pretty much it, really. Dragon's Plague is super polarizing. A bunch of people think it's an incredibly special part of the game that makes it what it is, and a bunch of people think that it's just irritating and wish it was gone. And then I guess there are people who think it should be something that you can toggle off and on in the options menu, which I still don't understand, really. All in all, this is just breaching the start of what people are saying around Dragons Dogma 2. And while I absolutely think there is tons of valid criticism that you can say about this game, it's not perfect, but I think that the game in particular, this one, has gotten a lot of undue hate. A lot of people propping things up as massive issues with it without having any actual context about it, and a lot of other people whose only knowledge about the game at all is seeing those false claims. So I think it's really important to talk about what's real, what's not, and just have some fun laughing at this stuff once in a while. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.